Hey everybody, Brigham with Drift here. In this video, 4 things I think you should know about the Salomon Takaharu Nakai EP. EP stands for Extended Play. This is one of 3 bigger sizes in relation to the standard Takaharu Nakai model that's a little bit different in its geometry and comes in smaller sizes. These boards are all a part of the Hillside project from Volle Nijvelt. Always been a fan of his and everything that he does. I demoed this in some marginal conditions for a couple runs last year. That got me excited enough to want to get on it full time. Anytime I see a board nice and long, nice and wide, focused on the powder, I'm interested. I want to try it. So we got it for this year. I hate to report that even though this is a good board, it didn't become one of my favorites. Before I get into those details, if you're new here, check out my specs and my biases below so you know where I'm coming from as a rider. And know too that we own the boards we talk about, get them in a variety of conditions, and then let you know what we think. So the first thing that you should know about this is this board will be in the lineup for 2026, but it's going to have a new name. It'll be called the Catalyst, and that's because, according to the Salomon rep, Takaharu Nakai is actually starting his own brand over in Japan and won't be a part of Salomon anymore. So, same board, but called the Catalyst. Second thing you should know, the rep told me the main idea here is a board for low-angle Japan powder, and I would say that it is successful at that. But this ended up being one of the most interesting boards for me to try to get a feel for and try to explain to you guys. And I think the way I'm going to explain it, as I've been kind of able to settle down, is it's kind of got an old school approach to a powder board that relies mostly on just overall surface area for float. And so I'm talking length and width. And in that regard, I would say, as you look at the geometry of this board and the profile and the flex, it's too much of a free ride shape to be a really good powder board, and it's too much of a soft powder board to be a really good free ride board. So as I get a little more into that item number 2, too much of a free ride board to be a really good powder board, what you have is a pretty good amount of camber from right behind the rear insert to about, 5 inches beyond the front insert. It's not a very aggressive camber, but it's a decent amount of it. And then you're flat for a few inches, and then a good amount of rocker to the nose. And you got a lot of nose here. So, I mean, when it comes to float, it's a long board with a lot of setback, and it's pretty wide. That gives you some decent float. But when it comes to that kind of more of a free ride shape, it's got a pretty big side cut radius. That's 8.5. So it wants to do bigger, wider, broader, longer turns. And the other thing contributing to that is that it doesn't have very much taper. I think this size 169 has 7 millimeters of taper. So there's a lot of tail back here. Even though the board's pretty long and you do still have a lot of nose, you got a pretty significant amount of tail, and there's not that much of it that's upkicked. There's not that much taper. So for a powder board, it floats well, but you don't get a whole lot of surfiness out of it. It's not that nimble. I wouldn't pick this as a tree board by any means, but it is good in those wide open, low angle situations. The third thing, as I mentioned, too much of a powder board to be a really good free ride board. Probably the biggest thing there is the flex. Maybe the camber too, like a really good free ride board, maybe the camber section would be a little bit more aggressive. But the main issue that holds you back as you treat it like a free ride board, like, oh, well, maybe then I could, kind of charge with that board. It's just really soft overall, and especially soft between the feet. There's a pretty significant flex point. The one good benefit to that is that this will do better in the trees than you might expect for the size and for that side cut radius and for the lack of taper. it can be pretty nimble still, and that's primarily because you can tighten up that turn radius and you can flex this thing around in the trees. So again, it's not a tree board. I wouldn't get it for that, but it's better than you might expect. But when it comes to kind of treating it more like a free ride board, as it's shaped that way, it feels a little bit like a Jones flagship, but you just can't push it at all in the way that you could push a flagship. And yet I would say for low angle POW, I mean, the flagship to me just does just as well as this. I actually have the flagship. It's not behind me, but I have one in a 169, so same size. And if I was going to pick between these two boards on a powder day, I would grab that flagship every time. It floats just as well, but when it gets tracked out or when you're on a groomer or whatever, you can just push that board a lot harder. So the fourth thing I would say in the end, I'm not calling this a bad snowboard. It's been a long time since I've ridden a bad board, but for me, I like to ride hard. I like to ride fast. I pretty much am always kind of pushing as hard as I can. This is admirable in open powder and really nice in open low angle powder. Surprisingly good in the trees, and it does okay at everything else. It's okay on a groomer. It's okay in, you know, chopped up powder. It's okay in firmer crud as well. But in all of those cases, it's like, it's okay as long as you keep it pretty mellow. It's just a board that wants to cruise. You can kind of think of it as like a Cadillac that you're just kind of cruising Main Street with, and, you know, not a board that you want to push hard. So a good board just doesn't really match up to my preferences that much. And I should mention too, if you're curious about it on a groomer, I mean, to me, that's something I just don't care that much about how a board like this does on a groomer, but I know a lot of people do. Hop over and check out Lars at Just a Ride, his channel. He's got a 15-minute review of this thing specifically when it comes to carving. I think you'll see some similar comments from him, but he's way more dialed in on that carving side, and that's worth a look. So that's it. My thoughts on the Salomon Takaharu Nakai EP. I would get this if you want something specifically for open powder. It can be steep, but low angle even better. And if you like to ride kind of more mellow and cruisy, that would be the target audience to me. Hit me up below with your comments and questions. Love to hear from you. We'll see you next time.